Hi all, thanks for joining me for the second chapter of my great-great-grandfather's memoir of the American Civil War. A couple of kind of updates on the first chapter. There was 3 words that I didn't know. One of them was vedette, which I guess was the forwardmost scout ahead of the pickets. Gauntlets, it's not a term I'm familiar with. Except for, throwing down the gauntlet, laying down the gauntlet. Basically, they were riding gloves. I think it predates riding to, medieval times or whatever. But basically, if you ever heard throwing down the gauntlet, basically the gloves are off, challenging someone's gauntlets were the riding gloves. And then the last thing was Copperhead. So I guess those were Democrats in the North who opposed the Civil War for varying reasons. So 3 vocabulary words I didn't know, maybe you didn't know, so just a point of clarification, and I'll hop right into it. So, on to Chapter 2. I was detailed as camp guard. There was a couple of older boys who had been downtown and got drunk, and they were put in the guardhouse, which was right in front of the colonel's tent. The adjutant and sergeant major. There was one door on one side and a window on the other. One sat in one end and the other sat in the other. They had 3 marbles with a marble in the middle and shooting back and forth that went on for quite a while when one of them said, "Let's go downtown again," and the other said, "Don't you see the guard?" He said, that kid can't stop us." So they got up, and I says, "Halt at the door," and they pushed me back, and off they went, right in full view of the colonel, adjutant, and the sergeant major. The officers saw it, and they came down. "What did you let those fellows out for?" I says to the colonel, "Colonel, I'm supposed to shoot our own men in the back?" He looked at me. I said, I came down here to shoot rebels, not to shoot our own men." The adjutant says to me, "Who's your captain?" I answered, "Captain Brooks, Company C." They looked at each other for a while, and then the colonel said, "You go to your tent." So I started and went to my tent, thinking all the time that I was dishonored. I did not know what to think. So I went into my tent and laid down, and I was feeling awfully bad. I must have been down there 1 hour when Captain Brooks came and opened the fly leaf of the tent, and he says to me in a nice way, "What's the matter, Bill?" I says, "I've been sent to my tent for not shooting our own men." He says, Don't worry. The colonel has been down to see me to tell you to be ready for scout tomorrow because there will be something special." I was quite relieved because I did not know just what action they were taking. But I was told afterwards by the captain that I showed good judgment. The colonel says, had we court-martialed his officers, some of us might have been shot in the back. It was only a few days after that I was recommended for rate corporal, and I have my commission today, which I am very proud of. When on scout, where we had quite a few wounded, and we had the ambulance along with us, our company was detailed to guard the ambulance back to where we started from. So in order to save time, there were 4 men detailed to go slowly ahead because some of the men were wounded in a bad way. While we cooked our coffee, while going along, I saw a couple of Negroes digging peanuts a little way over the fence, and I said, "How about a bag of peanuts?" I pulled out a jackknife saying, "I will give you this knife for a bushel of peanuts." He said, all right. The trade was made quick, and just as we got back to where we started to cook coffee, I guess his horse, I can't read it. I guess as and, it's supposed to be and. There's some typos in here. Alright, so let's start over. He said, all right, and the trade was made. And just as we got back to where we started to cook coffee and unbuckle our belly bands on the horses to give them a little wind, the parties that were guarding the ambulance came galloping back, said they had run into a bunch of rebels, and were driven away after quite a little skirmish. They run off with the ambulance. So we had orders to saddle up quick and mount. I had hard work in strapping my bushel of peanuts when the word was forward gallop. When we got full speed, the bag untied and I lost all my peanuts, and my jackknife too, for that matter. We had a 20-mile chase when we came to a bridge that the rebels had already torn up. 2 or 3 planks in order and went over into the water. We had another 10-mile run before we overpowered them and recovered the ambulance. 1 or 2 were wounded, but nobody killed, so some of the guards had to be taken back in the ambulance. As a quick side note, I think it was Ulysses S. Grant, one of his men before a battle, had given him a cigar, and they were enjoying some downtime when the call came, hey, mount up and head into battle, fighting took off. And so he mounted the horse with his cigar in his teeth and galloped into battle. And, after that kind of made the news and the papers, and everybody started sending in cigars. So it's just kind of funny. My great-grandfather ran into battle with a bag of peanuts, and Ulysses S. Grant rode into battle with a cigar. But hey, I've never ridden into battle, so I'm not going to give him a hard time for riding in with peanuts. Anyways, back to the story. I have in my possession now a letter that my mother wrote me, dated Quincy Mine, August 28th, 1864, and the following, it was first paragraph written, "My dear son, I have just received a letter from you, and glad I was to hear from you that you were well. We are all well here." So that's interesting. He hasn't said a whole lot about his family life prior to this, so that's the first mention of family. What did his dad think of him joining the war? Was he already part of the war? I don't know. He doesn't really tell us. So this is the first mention of family. So his mother, apparently he had written his mother wrote back. We are all well here, but Willie, I feel as if I wanted to see you. Okay, so Willie, I guess his name's William. Sometimes he's called Bill. Apparently his mother calls him Willie. I feel as if I wanted to see you and your brother once more. That was my brother Thomas. He was in Andersonville prison at the time. That's interesting. So I've got a great-great-grandfather that fought in the Civil War. Apparently I have a great-great-uncle that did some prison time. You learn some new things. This is actually my second time through. I'm picking up new things that I didn't pick up the first time. So, all right, I'm sorry. I'll stop getting off topic. So, I also have a letter which I wrote to my sweetheart, Hattie. I'm not going to go off the rails again, but all right. So he's got a sweetheart named Hattie back home, I guess. Hattie A. Chamberlain, who afterwards became my wife. So I guess my great-great-grandfather's name was Hattie. Great-grandmother's name was Hattie, whom the Harriet A. Mason tent is named after. Okay, so there's a Harriet. Her name is Harriet. He called her Hattie, and eventually she took his last name once they were married, and there's a tent presumably in Hancock, Michigan at the time, eventually, that was named after her. This letter was dated July 25th, 1864. Morganizzi, L.A. I don't know, Los Angeles or Louisiana. Our Colonel Robert E. Payne lost one leg at Port Hudson. He afterwards became United States Senator. Colonel Boardman was shot on a scout. When he fell off his horse, he almost fell into my arms. The rebels led us on and decoyed us until we run right into them without any warning. We had some very homesick soldiers. We had a burglar in our company. He was all right to blow the taps in the bugler. Yeah, that makes a little more sense. We had a bugler in our company. He was all right to blow the taps in the evening, as they always blow the taps together. But this particular bugler was away, finding fault with the rations we had, and he said at one time, if I only could get home, get into my father's pig pen, and get one square meal, I would be thankful. So one day, we got him out on the scout with us, and we put the lieutenant in command wise what we wanted to do, and he was told we would only go about 10 or 15 miles, but after we had ridden 10 or 15 miles, we had orders to go out 50 miles further to tear up a bridge, and we had to gallop quite a bit of ways, and he had to gallop too, or be captured. We got back the next day. He was a sorrowful looking fellow, as there was nothing the matter with the saddle, but he said himself he was sore and could not sit down, so he had to lay down for 2 or 3 days. Yep, that's when they talk about, getting back in the saddle, like, that's no joke. That'll tear you up if you're not used to it. One day, he made believe he was cleaning his revolver, and he shot his big toe right off. And I tell you, he did some dancing because it hurt more than he expected. But he got his discharge all right. So apparently this guy missed home so bad he shot his own toe off. There was a time we were chasing General Forrest up to Memphis. He was a great cavalry general, but more of a pirate. I rode up to a planter's house that morning, and I saw a woman crying. I asked what was the trouble. Did any of our boys do anything? No, she said. My boy was shot this morning by order of General Forrest for disputing some of his order. He dismounted when they were going to make a dashing raid. As we were crossing over some of his pontoon bridges before he had a chance to take them up, and he has done the same thing with us several times because he was a daring scout. I have been asked to explain the worst sight I saw while in service. I think it was a young Negro boy slave running away and was shot down into the woods near the road where we passed by, and lay there over a week with a dozen bullets through him, just barely alive. And he crawled out of the road very near naked, with worms all over his limbs, praying for us to shoot him. The doctor was sent for, and he helped the poor fellow all he could. Another time, we got into a little trouble when we put into camp after scout. Several of the boys went to a beehive to get some honey, and some of them were carried off and got within a half-mile where the boys were camped. We could not stand it any longer, so we opened up the hive, ate honey, and everyone got stung. The parties that were living on the plantation came over and entered a complaint, and it was pretty hard to disguise who did it. For myself, I was stung on the upper lip, which went over the top of my nose when swollen up. Another was stung on the tongue, and some over the eyes, and it was a horrible sight. We got our punishment right there. When they saw our faces, they let it go at that. Captain Brooks was our captain. He was a dashing-looking officer, and he was an Englishman by birth, and had little training before he came to this country. He got acquainted with a young lady down there and used to take her out horseback riding. Those days ladies rode a side saddle. There was always jealousy between the officers and some of the men. Someone, after he had his saddle all trimmed up for the next day, having put on his long officer boots, got ready to put his saddle on when he found that the flaps of his saddle were cut off by some of the boys for some reason. I never knew. Having a good stand in with the captain, he came to me and says, "Corporal, do you know who cut the flaps of my saddle?" I says, "No, Captain." He being an Englishman, he spoke in this way: "If I could find the man that cut the flips of my saddle, I'll hoist him with the foot if I go to hell the next Monday." That ended his ride for that day. Alright guys, that was chapter 2. I'm already at 17 minutes, so I'm going to cut it there. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the book still, and I look forward to the next one. Talk to you soon.